Welcome to Combat Conditional, a turn-based gaming podcast. My name is David Oliver Kling, your host, and I've been playing these types of games since 1986. You might be asking yourself, what is turn-based gaming? It is a type of gaming that has been called play-by-mail gaming, and as the genre evolved, as play-by-email gaming. The genre is ever-changing and is now often referred to as turn-based gaming. Many games being offered are like board games, with several different games providing role-playing opportunities as well. It all depends on the game. In this podcast, I will be sharing news on the industry and interviews with both players and game producers and designers. This podcast is sponsored by Suspense and Decision magazine, which started publication on November 30th, 2013, and is now being published by Talisman Consulting. Check it out. There is a link in the show notes. Welcome to episode 2. In this episode, I have the honor of talking with Peter Rzechorzek. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He is the owner and game master for TribeNET, a game that started in the mid-1980s. The current incarnation of the game started in 2013. I've been playing TribeNET for over a year now and enjoying it. Let's get started. Thank you for joining me, Peter. You run TribeNET, and that game has been around for a long time. Can you share some of the history of the game and talk about its evolution over the years?
Yeah, David, thanks for having me on board. Yes, indeed, TribeNET has been around for quite a long time, not quite as long as I have been around, mind you, but, it's a healthy history. I think I started in around about 1990 as a player. This came about when I went along, I invented a game or created a game called Negotiator, which I was walking around the place, and I took it to the Victorian Diplomacy Club here in Melbourne to see how the folks down there would go with it. And when I entered the club rooms, I found this group of players huddled around a table. I went over to see what they were doing. They were looking at this hexagonal map on graph paper, and that piqued my interest. And subsequently, I discovered that what they were looking at was a game called Tribe Vibes, which I took up and started playing for a few years. Played under the authorship of Jeff Perkins, who's a present player in the game. He created Tribe Vibe, and he was influenced himself by a couple of EBMs. I can't quite remember. I think Tribes of Crane might have been one of them, but I'm not sure he actually played that one. Anyway, Jeff ran the game for some years and gave it away, and a couple of other GMs filled in for a time, one of whom was Max 0123, who plays presently, and another was Jeff Fallon, who did the initial access coding for the game, without whom we wouldn't be where we are today. Now, after about, 2, 3 or 4 years or so, Max himself got a little bit overwhelmed by what he needed to deal with, and I took it from there. In 1997, I think I started GMing, and it was only possible with Jeff Fallon's code. Started off with 10 players, only 2 of whom were, as it were, legitimate. The other 8 were friends of mine, and those two American guys, Mike Jones was one, who is a present player. That grew steadily, and the game became, pretty popular very popular amongst those who played it, and grew to, at one stage, I think we had about 100 players. That continued up until about, when was it? Well, I've gone blank on this now. I think it was about 2012 that I gave it away. We can go into the reasons for that if you are interested. But then about 6 months later, I took it up again and started the version that you're now familiar with. So that's been running for about 9 years now. A little bit. That's a sort of potted history, if you like.
Why did you give it up?
Well, there were a couple of reasons, really. The game is open-ended, and one of the open-ended aspects is the research element of things, where players make suggestions about how they'd like their skill trees to progress and their plans to progress. And that just became too big for me to handle, and the coding wasn't keeping up with it. So there was that aspect to it. The game also at that time had religion as part of the fabric of the game, and religion was, if the research was open-ended, the religion was, off the wall. Players could go anywhere with that. It was just very hard for me to administer and get a 2-week turnaround out at the same time. And the other thing was that at the time, there were some big combats going on between large factions. So I was getting confronted with running, I don't know, something like 10, 12 combats a turn, which was taking me 2 hours or so to do as a minimum. And those factors all added up really to just being overwhelmed. And there were some personal issues going on in my life as well. I just thought it was time to pull the plug. But like with any addiction, David, I was off the wagon for about 6 months and then jumped back on again. It was hard to give away. I actually felt the absence. I felt the gap. Even though it's a very lonely road to be a GM, it was just a pretty important part of my life, really. And I guess I feel now that it's, if I'm going to make any sort of impact in my life, leave some legacy or other, will be around TribeNET. And I should add, I use the term my legacy, but it's really the legacy of the players. I think something that's unique about Tribe, well, I say use the word unique. I don't really mean that, because I think a lot of play-by-mail gamers probably have this feature about them, but it's a collaborative fictional essay or fictional novel being created here by the whole community of players, and I'm just the sort of front cover, I suppose. But I do see it as integral to my meaningful life, as it were. Yeah, I gave it up at the time, but soon revised that decision.
Well, you certainly have a dedicated player base. I'm on the Discord server for TribeNET, and it is always buzzing with activity. So you've certainly created a really wonderful community around TribeNET. You talked about it being your legacy, and you talked about it being like an addiction. What are the underlying motivators that keep you in the driver's seat for the game? What is it? Can you articulate what it is that keeps you invested in the game?
Sure, you're asking some pretty good questions there. Can I just take a step backwards, though, and address the Discord thing? Yeah, look, social media in general, but Discord in particular, has added a dimension to the game that you wouldn't have even dreamt about it back in the days of creation. PBMs and play-by-email games have the virtue of you play them when you're not playing them. You can go around with ideas in your head all day about what you should be doing in the game and tactics and negotiation plans and what have you. And that's one of the things I really liked about TribeNET. But I think Discord has added another dimension to that, as players can actively communicate with each other in real time. Back in the day when you relied on the postman, it was and phone calls. There's no way you could make an international phone call for 3 hours and stay in the black. But now you can do all of that sort of thing, and it's really the players that sort of have set that up and they run it, essentially. I sort of take a back seat when it comes to a lot of that sort of tech stuff. So, yes, in a sense, I've created the community. It wouldn't be there without many respects, but in other significant respects, it's the players themselves that run it. And I find that just a fantastic thing that we've got this community, this international community of like-minded fanatics that can sort of play this game when I'm not even around. I'll log on to Discord and see, 40 messages or a thread of 40 contributions. Sometimes I just have to turn that off. It's a double-edged sword for me in some ways too, because I just can't gauge with everything that goes on there. But it definitely adds life to the game. What motivates me? Well, look, since I was playing toy soldiers with my best mate from the age of 8, I've been a game creator and designer and player. I've I have designed a number of games over the time. I've played a lot of games like chess and Monopoly and drafts as a kid. So I guess it's in my blood, gaming. And then I had kids who got into the more video game style of gaming. So I got a bit of a feel for that as well. But I don't know. I just love creating stuff, and part of what I create is a rod for my own back, because I love coming up with ideas, new ideas for the game, which I try to instigate, and then as soon as I do that, this is more work than I anticipated, but I kind of can't help myself. And just the idea of being involved in this world and building it with other players, because a lot of the players actually help me and contribute to the ideas for growth. And it's just, the level of creativity and the social level as well. I just love it, essentially.
Well, thank you for sharing that. What do you think is the future of TribeNET?
Well, that is difficult to answer, because if you'd asked me a number of years ago, say pre-Discord, there's no way what I might have said would have been in any way accurate. I can only speculate. There are other folks in the community, in the PBEM communities, really working hard to bring this sort of gaming to a broader audience, and I feel like I'm part of that. It's a little bit frustrating in terms of how this actually come about, because I think we have a fantastic product here. When I look at what the PBEM game has to offer, it is a much richer gaming experience than many of the other genres of games that are out there. The disposable, throwaway, graphics, wham bam, thank you ma'am sort of play. But how we bring this to the broader player community, I'm not quite sure. I think what we say to each other tends to stay within our own communities, and we pat each other on the back for our contributions and so on, without actually get out to a broader audience. But having said that, if it does get to a broader audience, I don't know that I personally could cope with that in any case, because as things stand, although there are people working on more sophisticated coding for TribeNET, and I'll mention Nick in this breath. When that comes to pass, we may be able to cater for more players and maybe more GM. But really, I think we have to be careful. We don't want a flood of 1,000 people suddenly coming into want to play the game. But I guess that would be my hope, that more and more people see what's available in PBM gaming and start to play. Now, do I expect that to happen? I'm not sure, David. I don't know. It's quite possible, because the social media, it does bring it to a broader audience than certainly the pen and paper style used to do. What actually happens, I don't know. Excited to find out, though.
Yeah, that is exciting. It would be interesting if we had an influx of a lot of players. That would be, I guess, a good problem to have, but a problem nonetheless. Probably should have asked. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, in terms of influx, look, there has been a recent, when I say recent, it's been a couple of years, I guess. There has been a whole new guard of people that have come in, including yourself, and they have really injected some vitality into the game, and they bring their own skills, be it editing the newsletter like Bungus. I've gone blank on his real name, but I don't think you'll worry about that. And the Excel coding abilities that players have that could chip in here and there with some pieces. And people running a podcast, that you're doing, for instance, contributes to the health and growth. Then we've got Raven, who amazes me as the PBM historian, the archivist. Yeah, so I lost track of that last. I was just inserting a comment there, and then you were asking me another question, I think.
Oh, you're fine. The question that I was wanting to ask, and I probably should have asked this first. Can you describe what TribeNET is, the kind of game it is? So if someone who's never heard of it, what would you tell them?
Well, I tend to compare it in the first instance to games that people are more likely to have some familiarity with. I think if I had to select one game, it would be the game Civilization, the computer-based game called Civilization. And a combination of that and a game that people may have heard of but are probably less familiar with, called Diplomacy. And what these games have in common are that they are multiplayer games, the players themselves take a position in the game, be it a clan or a country, and from that base they try to extend their sphere of influence, as it were. So if you had to characterise TribeNET, you would call it a multiplayer build strategy game where also diplomacy and negotiation, therefore player interaction, is crucial to the play. So in diplomacy, for instance, you are forced into interacting with other players. You've got to negotiate with the, if you're playing France, you have to negotiate with the player playing Germany because they're right on your border and they probably will want to sneak into your territory at some stage, or sneak or move very aggressively. So you're forced into negotiation with other players in that game. In Civilization, similarly, if you're playing a multiplayer game, you need to talk to other players about whether you want to have peaceful alliances, or maybe you don't talk to them and just go for straight out aggressive interaction. So I think that's one of the things I like. I've built into my various game designs over the years this aspect of player negotiation and interaction. And TribeNET doesn't force it. So you can play a position in TribeNET without actually needing to talk to anyone. And some players sort of do that. But the rich and the full experience, I believe, is through forming alliances or playing a more dark side sort of position, such as a few of the players. Shall I name them? I don't know. Let's just call them the VVV for the sake of argument. We'll take a more aggressive posturing within the game, but it's still only, the players behind those aggressive positions are still really nice people. Don't get me wrong, they're not real aggressive people. But yeah, that's how I'd characterise it. It's a build strategy game that involves negotiation and diplomacy. And, you can add to that, TribeNET sort of looks at a sort of historical, tries to simulate history somewhat, or quite a lot really. How successful we are at that, not quite sure, but one can also enjoy that aspect of it as well. Part of the problem trying to simulate history, of course, is trying to write a rule set that captures the organic nature of reality in a set of words and pages, which has been one of the challenges as a GM, as a rule writer, especially if you want your game to grow and expand. It's not like a game of chess where everything is, the rules are, have clear limits and are clearly defined. TribeNET rules are sort of open-ended, and that appeals to some players and it doesn't appeal so much to others. Well, those that it appeals to play, and those that it doesn't appeal to don't play. So it's as simple as that, really.
Well, I certainly think TribeNET is a wonderful game. I've enjoyed playing it, and I highly recommend it to anybody who's listening. But I want to switch gears a little bit. A lot of people are nostalgic about play-by-mail games or turn-based games. I know that I am. Nostalgia is great, and it is important that we honor the past. However, I am interested in your thoughts on the future of turn-based gaming, or play-by-mail gaming, or play-by-email gaming. Is there a future, and what do you think that future looks like?
Well, I definitely think there's a future because, I haven't played other PBMs myself, so I really can't comment on what they are doing, but they are still around, which suggests that at least they have a history, and if you have a history, I think you have a future. I know that history was bigger, perhaps in the 80s was the height of PBM gaming, but for me, the zeitgeist to me suggests that TribeNET, which is what I'm familiar with, is as popular as it's ever been, and probably more so. And it's really just a matter of getting that, what it has to offer revealed more broadly. Now, that takes you into areas, I don't know exactly, maybe marketing, maybe social media presence. It's probably going to take some people to drive it along into those areas. As a GM, I don't really have much time or energy myself to do that sort of thing in any serious way, but I could imagine a future in which, say, TribeNET, for instance, we get the rules and the coding, neat and tight, and then we start looking at a more aggressive marketing role, I suppose. But, do you really need that? I mean, do the 60 players really need 120 players to continue to enjoy the game? I'm not sure. sure. I don't know that. I mean, we have to have a critical mass, obviously. We have to have players playing for the game to work. But I reckon our numbers at the minute, 60, 70, 80 is a workable number for the game. You know, whether you want to push it out and colonise and expand beyond that, yeah, that would be nice, but I'm not sure why it would be nice, really, if truth be told. But in terms of the future, look, I think it's pretty healthy. Look, I've just started King's Guild myself, so there's an extra player that's playing that game, and I'm already being courted by a number of players in that game. So there are vibrant communities there. I expect that they will continue. I think a lot of the new players that have come into TribeNET are a sort of generation younger than me. I think we've got quite a few players now in their their 40s. There was a risk that us PBMers would grow old together and start dropping off the perch or the porch, wherever you have your beer, and that would be the end of the game. But I think the new folks coming in, seeing its virtues, and they'll have kids, bring their kids in, their kids will tell their friends, that sort of thing.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for speaking with me today. Do you have any closing thoughts for the listeners, some of which may be TribeNET players and some of which may not be TribeNET players?
Yeah, well look, thank you for having me on, David. It is my first ever podcast, and whilst I'm used to standing in front of students and taking questions without notice, it's been a bit of a challenge today, so I hope I've addressed what you've asked well enough. Thoughts for the players? Oh, gee. Look, I can only say that with the TribeNET players, I really appreciate the vast majority of players are just very comfortable in the game. They don't give me too much heat. They will ask a few questions here and there, but they're basically very comfortable with the nature of what we've got going here. And so I really appreciate those people, my players. In terms of players playing outside, I can see no reason why they wouldn't get the same sort of experience out of the games they're playing that my players get out of TribeNET, really. I can already see in King's Guild that that's a very rich world that's being created. There's a lot of enthusiasm and energy going on. It's just a pity we don't have enough time or resources to be, unless you're Raven, of course, to be playing 6 or 8 of these games simultaneously, because they are a lovely distraction from what's going on in the, let's call it, the real world in inverted commas. You may or may not know that I've taught philosophy over the years, and so the distinction between the real world and the game world is not as sharp as many make out. You know, the gaming, the PBM gaming does serve as a very nice distraction away from those more worldly matters, as it were. And I would just, encourage people to give it a go. And giving it a go actually means staying in the game for 10 or 12 turns, because these are notoriously rule-heavy. TribeNET, I think, has a couple of 100 pages of rules, and even though it starts very simply, you've got to just dedicate yourself to stay in there and give it a crack. It's not a beer and pretzels game where you pick it up and play in an hour or so. It's a much deeper game than that. But with that deep depth comes corresponding rewards. I've loved it. I've loved it as a player. I've always missed it as a player, and that's why I've got back into King's Guild. Knight's Guild. I keep calling it King's Guild. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that's what I have there.
Well, thank you for those words, and thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. My name is David Oliver Kling, and I have been your host. I have been playing turn-based gaming since I was a teenager back in 1986. I love this genre of gaming, and I hope you do too. Please check out our sponsor, Suspense and Decision Magazine. And may your turns always arrive on time in good gaming.